when I looked at employee voice and the healthcare context, it became very apparent that silence was more of a feature than voice.
That was the voice of Victoria Lister, the guest on this episode of The Knowledge Mill. I'm your host, Greg Yoakum. Victoria Lister is a researcher in the Griffith Business School, workplace coach, consultant, and business owner-operator. Her PhD research investigates how the medical profession and its senior actors shape junior doctors' silences about their working conditions. This work has led her to realize that a similar phenomenon is impacting the productivity and well-being of doctoral students and early career academics. As a result, Victoria has also conducted research on this topic and has 2 more projects in the pipeline. To empower junior doctors and academics to find ways to resolve or speak up about their challenges, Victoria trained as a workplace coach and is currently researching and delivering a coaching for communication intervention for emergency medicine clinicians. She also works on other research projects in the emergency medicine context, on clinician coaches and their coaching experiences, leadership challenges, and leader identity formation. Prior to her PhD, Victoria was a management, governance, and marketing consultant working with small to medium enterprises in the nonprofit sector. More recently, she has consulted on a healthcare workforce well-being initiative and a cultural change program designed to address bullying, harassment, and discrimination in medicine. Victoria also operates a micro-business she founded in 2015, producing women's under and outerwear for retail online. Victoria and I had a far-reaching conversation about challenges that are faced in all fields of work and study, but especially those that are idiosyncratic to healthcare and our common field of academia. You'll hear us try to maintain optimism and buoyancy as we unpack these issues. Ultimately, I think we arrive in a hopeful place, and I hope you enjoy listening to it unfold. This episode of The Knowledge Mill was recorded on the Nathan campus of Griffith University in Brisbane on June 9th, 2025. Show notes, including links to more information on some of the topics that Victoria and I discuss, can be found at theknowledgemill.com/episode 18. That's episode and the numerals 1 and 8. Hi, Victoria. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Greg, and thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, absolutely. We're here on your beautiful campus. Here, well, actually, I guess you had some opinions about the Bush campus here that I was hearing before we started recording. But for me, this is reminiscent of American campuses that I'm used to, kind of a standalone thing, a lot of trees, and I don't see this very often in Australia.
Look, you're probably right, and it does have its beauty. If you like the Australian bush, you're going to enjoy it a lot. I'm not a big fan of the Australian bush, which is quite heretical to say. But yeah, I'll be looking forward to the day when the business school is actually in the city.
Yes, fair enough.
Yeah.
Because here we're in, for folks who might not have an understanding of Brisbane geography, we're in the Nathan campus, which is kind of on the side of Mount Gravatt, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, so it's slightly south of the CBD.
Yeah.
And it's quite hard to get to in terms of transport, public transport. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. I hopped in an Uber to get here this morning.
Sensible.
But yeah, that's Mattis in the previous recording mentioned that as well, that the business school, or there's a whole new campus opening in the city. Where is that going to open up?
Yeah, it's right in the middle of the CBD, and it's actually a beautiful building. It's the old Treasury building.
Oh, right.
So sandstone, columns, the whole bit. Currently, it's a casino.
I know the building you're talking about.
Yeah, it has uplights that you've probably seen, coloured uplights. So it's quite a feature in Brisbane City, and it'll be a spectacular business school, I think.
Yeah. Well, so it's just the business school that's opening there.
I'm not sure, but I think so.
It makes sense to be in a CBD as a
Most
business
of
school.
them are.
Yeah.
Or have at least a CBD presence, and Griffith hasn't. We do have a presence down at South Bank, which is another popular area, particularly for tourists. And it literally is just a 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk across the river. Yeah. Literally on the South Bank. So there's definitely a good footprint there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that'll be excellent, and that is a great location. I do know the building you're talking about. Well, fantastic. I guess we can hop into chatting a little bit about you and your work here at Griffith. How did you find yourself doing a PhD?
Bemused is probably the correct answer. But to answer what you're actually asking me, I came to the PhD project pretty serendipitously, which is probably not an unusual thing. It's probably more common than we think. I had no great ambitions to do a PhD. I certainly hadn't considered a career in academia. I was fresh out of an MPhil at another university and sufficiently interested in the research process to want to see what it looked like in the actual research context. So I decided to do some RA work to investigate what research looked like in the academic context outside of a research degree. And that didn't get very far because COVID came along and put a kibosh on the project. So I was still sufficiently interested in research to think, I'll look for another research job. Just see, I'll start there. And I found a job ad for a PhD, which, as I said, I hadn't contemplated. And it was in the business discipline. It was on employee voice in healthcare.
Right.
Now, I didn't really know much about employee voice, and I certainly didn't have a background in healthcare, but it sounded interesting. So I threw my hat in the ring and I was successful. So that more or less serendipitously started my journey into the PhD. So happenstance, if you like.
Yeah. You might be the first person. It's not an uncommon story to have applied for a PhD off of a job listing. That happens quite frequently in Australia, but I think you're the first person I've interviewed on the podcast that came into it that way.
Okay, so that gives you a bit of variety. It is a funny way to come in, and because of my experience with the MPhil, I wasn't unaware of what a research degree was all about, obviously. And I'd done a small research project as part of my master's by coursework. So it was actually going to be my third research project under supervision. So it wasn't a new unknown, but of course the PhD is a somewhat different experience.
That's right.
Just by virtue of its magnitude.
Yeah.
To the MPhil and a small research project, which was probably the size of an honours degree. So I'd actually done all my research coursework as part of the MPhil, so that was all out of the way.
That's a strong start to not have to handle that. Yeah,
exactly. So yes, and so I started in the middle of 2020.
Yeah, okay. And so one of the interesting things about that, of course, is that you get kind of locked into that topic, right? There's not so much flexibility. Has that been a challenge for you at all?
Not so far as topic, no. When I started to take a deep dive into the employee voice literature in the healthcare context, so employee voice is a management concept and it's specific to employment, as the term implies. So we're talking about the ways and means in which employees speak up at work about things that interest them or their organisations. In the healthcare context, obviously it's playing out in different kinds of workplaces. Primarily hospitals are often looked at in that context. But when I looked at employee voice and the healthcare context, it became very apparent that silence was more of a feature than voice. And that intrigued me. I'm drawn to dark side organisational issues. So immediately I'm like, right, I'm there, because that is super interesting to understand, because employee silence in healthcare actually impacts patient safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And most of the research in that space is on silence in relation to patient safety and care. The bit that started to intrigue me was, well, two bits, was the fact that the piece that often gets overlooked is silence in relation to people's working conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may not sound like much, but in the healthcare context, if you've got people whose well-being is jeopardised, staff whose well-being is jeopardised, particularly clinical staff, that also impacts patient safety and care.
Yeah.
So it's a massive problem. And my PhD has ended up revealing quite how big a problem that is, even though I focus on a specific cohort in the healthcare setting. But yeah, look, that's how I got started down that road. And I fell in love with the topic, mostly because it's crucial. And I guess I have to confess, I also saw a parallel process going on. My cohort that I focus on are junior doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So medical profession tops the healthcare hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that, like positive reasons for that. But it can play out, that hierarchical ranking of healthcare professionals can play out in some pretty awful and often dangerous ways. And I started to understand that, hang on, a lot of this silencing that junior doctors experience is actually the end product of professional forces that have a silencing effect on them. So I started to see the profession as somewhat culpable in setting up this situation, whether knowingly or otherwise. So I didn't find a lot of answers around that or investigation of those issues. They were certainly mentioned in the healthcare literature and in some of the management literature on these themes, but it wasn't sufficiently understood, in my view. Like, why? Why would you have this crazy situation where a profession that is there to heal rather than harm is actually, through its actions, through its culture, through its norms and values, often causing great amounts of harm to practitioners and to patients ultimately.
Yeah.
So that's where I went with all of that, and I had to turn to the sociology domain for some answers on that.
Sure.
So sociology of professions is a very interesting field, and I focused obviously on the medical profession, and that is widely covered in that literature because it is such a standout example of how group dynamics in the professions form and play out. And I also turned to the work of Bourdieu, whose sociology isn't necessarily on the medical profession, but he is very focused on social groups and how they essentially champion their own interests, how they construct themselves, how they organise who's who in the zoo, how the various forms of capital get traded amongst members, be it social, symbolic or reputational, knowledge-based, financial or economic capital. So all these various advantage-seeking behaviours occur in social groups. And to me, this explained what I was starting to see in the medical profession and certainly amongst the junior doctors who I was starting to connect with and read about. I read many junior doctor memoirs. There's been quite a spate of those just in Australia in recent years. It's a topic that's I think starting to capture the public's, I was going to say imagination, but it's more attention because these are very public issues ultimately.
Yeah.
They're somewhat hidden from view, but more and more we're starting to see what's going on behind those hospital doors. And you've got programs like what's it called? This is Going to Hurt. I don't know if you've seen or heard about.
I've heard that phrase, but I don't know what it refers to.
Yeah, it was a memoir written by a British junior doctor called Adam Kay.
Okay.
And it was made into a very successful BBC production not so long ago, a couple of years ago. So it's been broadcast out here in Australia as well. It's quite a grim look. I mean, Adam Kay is a comedian. He's comedic in his approach, but it's a very dark topic. And he doesn't pull any punches in terms of how he portrays the working life of the protagonist, who is a junior doctor.
Yeah, right.
In training. So, yeah, my work, as you can tell, look, I've launched straight into the topic of what I'm researching.
Why I'm thinking of all these questions I want to ask to follow up, but I'm more interested in letting you tell the story.
Well, ask away, because there's a lot to say on this topic, and as you can see, I'm kind of into it.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely helps when it comes to a PhD. You need that commitment.
Yeah.
One of the things that occurred to me is I wanted to ask you is this interest, because of course the UK as well as Australia has state healthcare, but of course the NHS has its own unique challenges at the moment. Is it the fact that there is a public interest in healthcare in the sense that we all pay into it and we all benefit from it? Is that maybe where some of this interest is coming from, and how much of that maybe goes back to the pandemic as well?
Well, that's an interesting point, and I hadn't actually considered that angle myself. So I'd have to say no. But what you're suggesting is spot on, because we do pay for the public health system. I mean, we have private healthcare as well, and private hospitals here in Australia. So it's a bit of a mixed bag here, comparable to, say, the States and the UK. We probably fall somewhere in between those two. But no, it wasn't an angle I'd taken. I was thinking more about how this impacts us as people, who all of us at some point in our lives will be encountering hospitals, whether it's, well, obviously most of us were born in one.
Yep.
If we're having children, we'll be back there, other health issues, and of course end of life. More or less, you're going to encounter a hospital. So they are places with which we are pretty much forced to interact. Our loved ones will certainly be part of that scenario as well. So we're all involved in that system, and we're all going to be impacted by it, hopefully positively, but not always. So I see it as a public interest matter, just in terms of not so much the economic stakehold we have in it, but the impacts that it has for people. So people being patients and people being the practitioners. As I mentioned, I don't have a background in healthcare, so I had very limited awareness of what it's like to work in a hospital. When I started to read and talk to junior doctors and ultimately interview them, I got the inside story of what that journey and process is like, starting from medical school right up to, say, end of specialist training. Not all doctors undertake specialist training, but many do. Most do. So they'll either become a GP, which is a specialisation, or they'll specialise in all sorts of areas like cardiothoracic or surgery or psychiatry, all the different specialties that you can think of. But there are a percentage who don't go down that road and become career medical officers. So they're working in the hospital context, they're learning in much the same way that most junior doctors too, but they're not attached to a medical college doing a specialist further or vocational training, as they call it. So they're a little less, I guess, subject to the vicissitudes of the profession, because they're not as connected to the colleges, the royal colleges. Most of them are royal colleges, not all, that control medical training at that specialist level.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because it occurs to me that this interest in healthcare, that's what led you to do this study. So you're actually kind of at the front in that way.
Yeah, though I didn't have that interest in healthcare that I knew of anyway before starting on the project. It's, as I said, it sounded interesting, but I had no real sense of what I was stepping into. Doing the deep dive on it has been very revealing and somewhat, initially, somewhat frightening, in the sense of I had no idea that all this goes on.
Sure.
All this being the many difficulties that many junior doctors face in their working lives. I had no idea that this goes on. And I saw that as very problematic in terms of what that meant for, as I mentioned, patients, families, etc.
Well, that was one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that this, of course, has a carry-on effect to patients, maybe not directly, but is part of the problem perhaps that if I'm a junior doctor and there's something about the culture that is perhaps getting in the way of me doing my job, is it a situation where I think, well, I'm just one doctor. There's a million junior doctors like me. They're all dealing with this problem. I'll just deal with this problem. And so you don't speak up. You feel like maybe you don't have agency. Is there something along that line?
You've definitely hit the nail on the head. One of the nails on the head in terms of the word agency. That's certainly been one of my findings, that the junior doctors who have broadly more agency are the ones who are more likely to voice their concerns. Most of them, however, no matter how agentic they are, and the agentic ones were mostly those who were quite connected in the profession, as in they would often take leadership roles, so become junior doctor representatives in their workplace or in their college, or even as medical students. There's a nationwide medical students association, for example. And taking on those kind of leadership roles allowed them to build networks, connections, allies, understand the system more. And that is a very empowering kind of activity, because it helps you understand the environment that you're in, which is pretty unfamiliar for most of them when they start.
Yeah.
And it helps you navigate and know what's available to you to speak up and who might be able to support you with that. But if you're a junior doctor who doesn't get involved in those kinds of activities, and many don't, it's exactly the same. And I hope we come back to this, but I've mentioned that there's been a parallel process going on throughout my degree, which is at a point I realised, hang on, academia is very similar to medicine.
I've been thinking this the whole way through.
Yeah. So I've occupied representative roles pretty much since I started my MPhil. I've been an HDR representative of some kind. So we're talking like a 10-year history of taking on those roles. And it's absolutely true. When you do that, you do know the system better. You know where to get help. You can guide other people. Does it necessarily lead you to speak up? Now, that's another issue because the barriers to voice that the junior doctors experience are very much related to threats to their progression, their advancement, to their obtaining a job the next year. They're all on 1-year contracts. So there's a constant, I need to get a job.
Yeah.
I need to get signed off on my training so I can progress to the next stage. I need to apply for this college because I want to specialize in X. And now all these stages and phases rely on the say-so, the good graces of the people supervising you. So listeners will immediately again draw parallels with supervision.
Yeah.
So the other part that happens is that their working conditions, and recalling this is the area that I'm particularly interested in, their working conditions are pretty tough. So I've come to think of the junior doctor experience as Game of Thrones meets Survivor.
Oh, wow. Okay. That does sound intense.
Yeah. So it's quite political. And if you're not aware of the politics, you're going to be taken by the physical survival aspect. So there's often shifts that are lengthy. They can last 3 days.
Yeah.
There's a culture of not wanting to stop and support yourself. So you keep going. There's, we don't take breaks. We don't go to the bathroom. We don't eat. We don't drink.
It becomes a point of pride.
Yeah.
Almost that you're working so hard, not doing any of these things.
That can be the case. Some participants described it as it's used as a badge of honour. They weren't necessarily subscribing to that point of view, but the whole scenario is also intensely competitive because there are very few, relative to the number of medical students graduating from universities in Australia, and there are more and more of these. We have, as I understand it, a very high per capita number of universities, medical schools rather, and universities, in terms of our quite small population. So there's increasing numbers of med students coming into the market, so to speak, most of whom want to specialise either as a GP or in one of the other areas, all coming into the hospital system. The GPs, many of them will exit and do their training in the community, but those who want to pursue other specialties have to remain in the hospital and access their training through there. And there are often very few roles. So it's highly competitive to even get into a training spot in a college in many disciplines, many specialties. There's, as I said before, there's competition for jobs. There's competition because that's part of the medical culture.
Yeah.
There's, these are alpha people.
Yeah, they want to be the best of the best.
Yeah. So again, more parallels with PhD students. The thing that concerns me, the other part I haven't mentioned is there's a lot of bullying, harassment and discrimination in medicine. I haven't done a comparative study, of course, with other countries. And I know it's not only happening in this country, in Australia. it seems to be a feature of the medical profession wherever you are. Probably not true. I have heard that Cuba, for example, has a flatter hierarchy.
Okay.
Yes. It'd be very interesting to check that out, because in that country, their political system is such that it's of equal value to be a doctor as it is to be a barista.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be very interesting to look into, to see what happens in countries where there isn't as much status attached to being a doctor, which is another confounding factor when it comes to silence, because, there's intense competition to be the best, to get the role, etc. It's not to say that junior doctors aren't motivated by genuine care for people. I wouldn't say all of them are. I think there's, for some people, quite an interest in status.
Sure.
And perceived income, etc. But for others, many, they genuinely want to support humanity. And to get into this very rigorous training system, whether it's in a specialty college or not, I mean, it's rigorous from the get-go. Internship, the first year out of uni. And of course, they start to encounter this culture while they're at the university, because they do work placements, they do clinical placements. So the exposure to the culture of medicine starts during university. It starts in the classroom. You know, the hierarchy becomes apparent.
Yeah.
You know, there's the professor who's usually the consultant at the hospital, or the guest lecturer who comes to deliver training in you know, some area, and they're made aware of the way it is quite early on.
Yeah. And then I guess there becomes a bit of, because sticking with the academic parallel, right, there's a school of thought out there amongst some supervisors, you know, that my supervisor was hard on me and I had to do this and that and the other, and I never said boo about it, and so I'm going to drive my PhD students just as hard, and I'll expect that they're not going to complain about it. And in effect, what that is bullying. But if it becomes normalized and it becomes part of the culture, but then of course the stakes in academia are not nearly as high. If I underperform on a certain day because I'm feeling blue about things not going my way, or a socio-political thing has happened in the office where I feel like I got passed over for a promotion because I wasn't the teacher's pet, or, you know, something like this, and that affects my performance, probably no one's going to die as an outcome, but not the case necessarily in healthcare.
That's exactly right. You know, that whole context you've just described throws the whole thing into sharp relief, because you're exactly right. We don't have that immediate impact on other people's well-being, you know. So it's a wonderful place to really look at these dynamics around how social groups form and conduct themselves, how the professions organise themselves, what motivates them. And I'm talking about the profession at the level of the institution itself. And of course, the profession is a conglomerate of individuals, but those who are high in the healthcare hierarchy or the professional hierarchy are the ones who are shaping the narrative, the direction of the profession, the culture of it.
Yeah.
So, and as mentioned, they're the people who permeate all the different levels of the organisations that comprise healthcare. So, yeah, but I have done parallel research because of my parallel experience, understanding the junior doctor context and going, this is sounding familiar.
Yeah.
So I have done some breakaway research on early career academic voice and silence, and I plan to do more. And that has revealed very similar dynamics, but yes, without the quite as dramatic context.
Well, that's one of the things I guess that I wanted to ask you about, because in academia, there's no incentive to speak out. Maybe out of self-preservation. If you felt like you needed to defend yourself, you might speak out. But otherwise, it's exactly as you described in healthcare. And I'm speaking very broadly here, not about any one uni, least of all my own. But there is this idea that you would not want to rock the boat, and you don't want to put a target on your back. Oh, he raises trouble, because when something happens, he always has some opinion about it. And your opinion might be a very valid, worthwhile one. Why don't we have more women on this panel? But if you're the person who is just always bringing something up, you personally are trying to move things in the right direction. But that is not encouraged within the broader apparatus.
Yes, exactly it. I think it was last year, I did a poster for the business school research. It's a research day that we have each year. So things like 3-minute thesis finals happen. There's a poster competition. There's research workshops and some socializing. Anyway, I did a poster for that, which pretty much captures what you've just described. I positioned all the things I've been talking about as the medical professional game, and I used the visual of snakes and ladders.
Right.
And those phrases that you mentioned, like don't want to rock the boat, keep my head below the parapet, don't be a troublemaker. All these kinds of phrases were very much what emerged in the data that I collected. So I turned it into a game where you can't progress in the game if you do these things.
Right.
So if you speak up about X, down the snake you go, back to the lower, back to the beginning potentially. And if you do keep your head below the parapet, you can climb the ladder and eventually make consultant or wherever it is that you want to head. So it was a very, I guess, simple and accurate, dare I say, representation of
I would say so,
of the games that get played in what I call elite professions. So medicine, the original professions were medicine, law, and divinity. Right. So we're talking medieval times.
Yeah.
Divinity is less of a profession these days. It still exists. But, of course, we can recognise other professions have perhaps come into that space. So law and medicine still certainly the classic elite professions. Architecture would be another one. Maybe accounting. You get similar scenarios also in other highly competitive spaces like consultancies. So think about the big 4 or 5 consulting firms and their cultures. But certainly I've had a few people in law tell me that they recognise, what my research is about because they live the dream in the legal version of it. So, of course, there are people who are... The people who came forward to interview with me for the PhD, they were what I would call, most of them were awake to the problem. There are others who are not. They accept it as the norm.
Right.
This is how you do medicine. Many medical people grow up in medical families or have near relatives who are vets or doctors, or they have a familiarity. So they're sort of familiar with the tropes of medicine and there's an acceptance of the culture of it before they even well, while they're at school, it's part of their family life. Then there are those from cultures where medicine is a prized profession.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an imperative to, be a doctor, or be a lawyer. And so there are definitely those in the system who are, I guess, oblivious of the game,
mm-hmm.
as Bourdieu would describe it. However, Bourdieu has an interesting twist to his description of how the game is played. He says that there is a process called misrecognition, which refers to the willful complicity in the game that you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to accept at some level that this is the game and you're going to play it. And then you willfully overlook what that might mean, or its broader implications, or what it might do to you to participate in that game. But the recognition is that there's a game going on here. I need to participate in this game in order to secure what I want to secure.
If you don't mind me pivoting back to academia for a moment, it occurs to me that there's a lot of that within our field, and how that's kind of manifested. And once again, painting with a broad brush here, not talking about myself or any one particular person, but I do follow a lot of conversations. Back before Twitter became terrible, I used to follow a lot of academics on Twitter, and I was just getting a taste for what the field would be like when I was still in my PhD. Now it's kind of hard to find those conversations, and I've more found blogs, for example. You might be familiar with the Thesis Whisperer, and those kind of publications that are a bit more casual and a little bit more insightful that way into what it's actually like on the ground as an academic. And there is out there this idea that you were just discussing about complicity, that you come in and you learn the rules of the game, and depending maybe on if you come from a family of academics versus myself, I was first in family through the master's and PhD. I didn't know anyone who had a PhD until I suddenly was working amongst no one but people who have PhDs, which was an interesting pivot. But I think there's something to, like what you were saying before, your life experience, and maybe even if you come into, I've spoken to a few people on this podcast who have come into academia from industry, and they can immediately see that there's some rotten things happening, systemic rotten things. And some of those are very broad. There are also rotten things happening in society, such as inequities in different ways, gender inequity, etc., LGBTQI plus inclusion, or exclusion, as it were, in many cases. And so there's kind of the nuts and bolts side of things where I think a lot of academics would just like to get on with their work, and they would just like to do good work. But the nuts and bolts expectations of what grants have you applied for and successfully achieved? Well, I didn't need a grant to do this project I was doing, so why would I apply for something that I don't need just because I'm expected to go chase grant money? So that becomes an impedance to you just doing good work. But then there's also that sociological side where it becomes normalized to have what are known as manels, where there's just men on a panel. And I have read stories of people taking a stand, for example, men who refuse to be on manels. If they see that it's only other men on the panel, they will say, you need at least one woman. Here's 3 I can recommend to take my place because I don't want to be on a panel with just men. So there are those kind of things happening. But you put your neck out there if you do those kind of things. It's not encouraged. And if anything, it can be a detriment to you in your career.
Absolutely. And that is the case for the junior doctors. And yes, it's certainly the case in our world too. Though it's funny because even though, I'll use the example of medicine, even though medicine can discriminate horribly, it's also strangely indiscriminate in the sense that you could be, in fact, I had a conversation with a a senior junior doctor last year as part of some work I was doing in industry around medical culture, who had come out here from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come out here, you start as an international medical graduate.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, of course, forced into that pathway and experienced an incredible amount of discrimination, even though he was white, male.
Yeah, right.
Seemingly, of the club.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the culture of putting you in your place is so powerful that anyone's fair game, essentially.
Yeah, right.
Potentially.
And then, so you just don't even know.
No.
It could turn on you at any time.
Yes, I imagine so. And the strategy most junior doctors adopt is, I'll just keep below the radar enough not to get noticed for being a troublemaker, so-called, if one wants to talk about concerns, but noticed enough to make a positive impression on the people who are going to be signing off on my rotations, terms, recommending me for training positions, hiring me, etc. So it's quite a diabolical situation, and can impact anyone.
Did you find in the process of gathering all these stories, did you find any people who were in there trying to affect some change?
Definitely. So most of the people who spoke to me fall into that category in some way, shape or form. Some are very active in that. Some use the mechanisms I described before, so they take on leadership roles and try and affect change that way. Others use more creative means. I mentioned before that there's junior doctor memoirs proliferating these last few years. So some get involved in blog writing or podcasting, etc., probably more in an anonymous context.
Sure.
There was a very well-known book that was released a few years ago called Emotional Female, which was a memoir, and it documented the quite public difficulties that a junior doctor in New South Wales went through in her attempt to get accepted onto a college training program. Junior doctors are very worried about their situations. Junior doctor suicide is not uncommon.
Right.
It's quite well known that many succumb to fatigue driving home and will have fatal accidents.
Right.
And I say this reluctantly because I don't want to paint a scenario that is as black as all that. But these are the daily realities for many. And the pressures increase the more you want to advance in the medical profession. So if you're aiming for that specialty, to become a consultant, the pressures only increase. The one junior doctor I interviewed who was free of that training system, of the specialty training system, was probably had the most normal, air quotes, life out of everyone I interviewed.
Yeah, in terms of work-life balance and
She felt more like she could have been working in a corporate setting. So she had clearly defined interests outside the medical profession.
Yeah.
But, it's similar as for the PhD student. If you set your sight on achieving a PhD, particularly if you want a job in academia, you are forced down a certain pathway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, with certain rules.
Yeah.
And we've discussed some of those rules of the game.
So you saw some empowering examples within the healthcare field, and that sort of reminds me about what you were saying before, that you've been trying to affect change in that same way in your role as a PhD researcher. Can you speak a bit more to that?
Yes, I can. So, as I mentioned, I've been doing HDR representative work for a while. And I've only seen the concerns of people escalate as I've progressed through the first Master of Business, where I wasn't so much in that space, but I have that as a benchmark experience. Moving to the MPhil, start to understand the research environment more. PhD is an intensification of that. So as I've moved along through those degrees, I've learnt more about how these things impact people. But it was pretty obvious from the get-go that people were emotionally, physically, mentally, often quite seriously impacted by their PhD or HDR work, high degree by research work. So my interest as a representative is to see what does concern people and see if something can be done to change what happens in that experience. My biggest concern is for international students. They are generally, I think, the most they are generally the most disadvantaged or potentially harmed by the PhD process. There are a lot of things which we haven't touched on yet. The kind of bullying that happens in academia can be a lot more subtle than that which I have heard happens in medicine, where working conditions can literally be quite brutal. The kind of subtle bullying that goes on in academia can be very hard to detect.
Yeah.
And very hard to detect if you are from a culture which deifies people who are professors, essentially, who are high in the academic hierarchy, who are to be venerated rather than suspected of anything nefarious. And I've seen and heard from international students who are, I guess, unaware of the options available to them as students, that they do have rights, that they can change their supervisory team, they can change their topic, they have some power, but it's very, very difficult for them to even conceptualize that.
Yeah. Or like you said, even to know that there's a problem.
Yeah.
If it's been normalized. And it is one of the, or it could be almost impossible to detect, because it could just be the absence of opportunity, that you're not asked to do things because you're an international student, English is your second language, whatever the case may be, which is, of course, a form of bullying and exclusion, but you never know that you weren't asked. Yeah.
You know, one of my greatest wishes will be to one day see and it may not be in my lifetime, but to one day see the PhD and the way it's rolled out substantially changed. I do like the direction of the industry-based PhD. That's something I'm, spending a little bit of time on as well. The PhD that attempts to unite real world work with academia, and currently there are incentives. Our government here is incentivising that kind of PhD. So I'm very much about the practical outcomes of the PhD. And I think that would help alleviate, possibly, some of the symptoms that we've been talking about. But different ways of breaking what I think is a bit of a stranglehold on what this thing is that we do that sounds so alluring and so important and special. But I think a reality dose around the PhD is required, and also a lessening of its importance.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who, in my view, are far smarter than many academics I meet. And they're often tradespeople, people who are doing practical things, who have a grasp on the world in a way that many academics don't. And they have a mastery of life that many academics don't. And I think our value system is a little bit distorted. And that's not to denigrate the many wonderful people I know in academia. You know, you've been meeting some of them today while you've been visiting here. Now, they're just people that I adore and respect and have a lot of fun with. I do see, though, that the PhD knocks people around a lot. And is this wise education, is my question. Why do we accept that as normal, if not desirable? Or we're prepared to gloss over the challenges that are inherent in doing this kind of work. And, of course, it continues through to people working at your level. You know, it's not the end of the road. It only just begins.
That's right. That's right.
So why do we think this is a good way to work and help people grow? I'm not sure that it is.
That might be a good place to wrap up this part of the conversation. Some food for thought for people out there listening. And maybe there are people in similar situations where they're recognizing there are some things around them that could be better. Maybe now they'll feel empowered to, if not do something about it themselves directly, at least pursue what avenues are available to maybe start undoing some of these systemic problems.
Absolutely. And if people want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, and I love talking about these issues because I think airing them is the only way that we're going to truly get underneath them.
Yeah, that's right. We have to recognize there is a problem before we can tackle it. Yeah. Well, I'll absolutely put, a link to your LinkedIn profile and other ways of reaching you on the show notes page. So if anyone's listening to this, you can find that there. But otherwise, we'll move into the final questions that I ask everybody. And the first one is, what's on the horizon for you in terms of, are you looking at maybe going to any conferences or working on some publications?
Publications, not so much now. I'm in the final stages of my PhD. So I went part-time last year, which has brought me a little bit of time for write-up. And that's my focus. Having said that, I have at least 2 conferences in mind. One, a healthcare-focused conference, and ANZAM again at the end of the year. And I was at AIRANS in February this year as well. So they feel like my touch points. Yeah.
No, so you're kind of straddling that. You've got the healthcare and the management side, and having it both ways.
I do connect a lot with healthcare professionals where I can. And ANZAM, of course, also has a health management stream and special interest group.
Well, maybe someone will be listening to this and come and find you. It's in Geelong this year, isn't it? The ANZAM conference.
Yes.
That'll be excellent. The last question that I ask everybody, and maybe it's hard to answer because you are very much at the end and focusing up on writing, but something not related to the PhD that you're excited about at the moment.
Yeah. Well, finishing is top of mind. That's a little way off. Because of my part-time status, I do other projects as well. And like many people, part-time work is part of the PhD life. So I actually received some funding to do a small research project of my own, which is examining workplace coaching. So I trained in workplace coaching so I could coach junior doctors and PhDs and HDRs. So I'm now testing coaching as a pathway to voice in a hospital context. So working with doctors and nurses who are doing a coaching program with me, and then I speak to them at either end to gain their thoughts about the experience, etc. So that's exciting because it speaks to what I think is possibly the only immediate strategy we can take to shift culture, and that is to work with individuals. Shifting the culture and the systems, that's a big project.
Yeah.
And unless we get serious legalistic governmental might behind those things, it's not going to happen overnight. So, but you can work with people.
Yeah.
One-on-one, maybe small groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that would help people to feel empowered and have that sense of agency.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice one. Thank you very much, Victoria, for sitting down and sharing your story with me. I found all of this really fascinating, especially those parallels with academia. I wish you all the best as you finish things up.
Thank you, Greg, and congratulations on a great podcast. I've started listening and, super enjoying it.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Appreciate it.